Lucy, who had gone out somewhere, some distance from the house, when they'd started breaking things off, she came in to answer the screams and saw this unusual scene of bloodshed.
Over time, it turned out the operation, of course, was successful, and Joseph kept his leg. The healing was long-term. Joseph would go to Salem, sent there to be with his Uncle Jesse Smith there, where they felt that the cool breezes of the ocean would help him in healing. He'd be on crutches for nearly 4 years until this had finally healed. It's remarkable as we think about this whole experience that the very doctor, the only doctor apparently at that time, who had begun any experimentary techniques with this advanced stages of osteomyelitis, would be within 5 miles of Joseph Smith's home. It's also significant to consider that Joseph Smith, little would he understand at this time just how necessary it would be for him to have this leg. He's going to make several round trips between Kirtland and Missouri and other locations. And so we can see the hand of the Lord here, preparing and watching over this young man who was to become a prophet in preserving his leg in this rather marvelous manner.
With devastating medical bills and struggling to eke out a living as farmers on the Connecticut River, the Smith family thought to better themselves by moving to Norwich, Vermont. There they again attempted to make a living by farming, but in the years 1814, 15, and 16, they faced crop failure, a situation all too familiar to New England farmers.
The worst of those years was 1816, because during that summer, from June 8th until the 1st of September, there were 4 killing frosts in the summertime. There was a record snowstorm in June, and so it virtually destroyed all of the crops in New England. The reason, incidentally, for this terrible weather pattern was apparently the great volcano in a small island off the coast of Indonesia. A huge volcano there erupted, blowing about 4,000 feet off the top of a mountain, putting into the atmosphere 25 cubic miles of debris. And so the Smiths and everybody else's crops were ruined that summer, and many of them, including the Smith family, sought greener pastures by moving to a more mild climate, which in this case was to New York and Pennsylvania.
Joseph's father had gone to Palmyra, set up a place for the family to be, and sent the wagon and the teamster. But Lucy says this man actually turned out to be, in her words, an unprincipled wretch. And he was drinking, spending the money for their trip on himself. And to cap it, Joseph, who was lame, as he uses that term, he was off crutches by now, but not far off crutches, he was forced to walk in the snow because Caleb Howard had actually fraternized with another family coming along the way and taken Joseph's place on the wagon with a couple of young women that he wanted to talk to.
Howard drove me from the wagon and made me travel in my weak state through the snow 40 miles per day for several days, during which time I suffered the most excruciating weariness and pain. And all this that Mr. Howard might enjoy the society of 2 of Mr. Gates' daughters, which he took on the wagon where I should have rode. And this he continued to do day after day through the journey. And when my brothers remonstrated with Mr. Howard for his treatment to me, he would knock them down with the butt of his whip.
On the final stage of the trip, Lucy dismissed this unprincipled teamster, Mr. Howard. He was going to leave with her team and her wagon, and she called a group of people who were there at the tavern and dismissed him and said he was a thief and she would need his services no longer. And Lucy arranged to have Joseph travel with an accompanying family, and he was going to be on their sled. And somehow in a very vindictive mood, somebody hit Joseph and knocked him into the snow. And Joseph said he was left wallowing in his own blood until a stranger picked him up and took him to Palmyra. When they reunited in Palmyra, Lucy has a very touching picture of the children surrounding their father, weeping and embracing him, and the reuniting of the family. The family was the strength of the prophet. The family was called, as well as the prophet, to bring about the restoration of the gospel.
The town of Palmyra that the Smiths found as they immigrated from Vermont was a prosperous town. It had a population of probably nearly 2,500 and a lot of thriving businesses. One of the reasons Palmyra was thriving was that it was right on the route that had been mapped out for the building of the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal would connect the Hudson River in the east with Lake Erie in the west, be 363 miles long, and go right through Palmyra. So this was a very promising place. The canal was a mixed blessing, however, because it brought with it a lot of unsavory characters, some working on the canal, some there in other capacities, but some people referred to it as the Big Ditch of Iniquity.
When the Smith family arrived in Palmyra, early 1817, when the family was all together, they sat down and considered what they ought to do for the future to make a living. And they determined that they would go into farming. They found this piece down just over the town line in Manchester that seemingly spoke to them. And I say spoke to them because it had the resources to bless their lives. For example, it had the oak, which would be needed for coopering work. It had willows along the year-round stream that flowed through the property for hoop material, cattails for gasket kind of material for headers for barrels, etc. It had gentle sloping land for orchards. It had good soil and good land for wheat, corn, all those crops that folks raised at the time, buckwheat, rye, pumpkins, etc. At the time of moving down to the town line, and anticipating that they would purchase the 100 acres, they built a log home prior to moving from the village. The log home was about 50 feet or so inside of the town line on the Palmyra side. It was a two-room structure on the main level, the kitchen, and then a room they called the best room. In time, they would add a little wing to the rear of the home, constructed of sawn slabs that they acquired at a sawmill. It looks like that they built this little bedroom wing in preparation for the birth of little Lucy, the last of their children, which would bring the family to Mother and Father Smith and 9 children. Upstairs, there was a garret, a half-story structure that you would go up to that level via a steep stairway. 2 bedrooms up there, one for the boys and one for the girls. Although cramped quarters, it was a snug, comfortable dwelling for the Smith family.
The Smiths spent long days constructing this home and establishing this farm. Digging out tree stumps and plowing the land consumed much of their time as they struggled to reach financial security and worked hard to assure it. Although economic stability was a major concern for the Smiths, it was their continued search for the truth, their quest, that proved of eternal significance.